in the eastern part of the country, in a village called Obo. I was born in 1970 when the war had just ended. You know, we had a war, a 3 year war of independence where the people from my side of Nigeria, they wanted to break away from, you know, the wider country because of broken promises and, you know, all kinds of things. So my parents went through that war with four young children. You know, my father didn't actually take part in the war, you know, because all young men were drafted to take part in the war because he was the first son, and the role of the first son was really very important. You know, you have to carry on the family line, and you know, first sons are very precious. So, you know, his family hid him away so that he couldn't carry on the family line. But they didn't hide him along with his young family because he needed to move. You know, if the enemy was coming, he needed to come to Mr. So my mom and my four young children, they went into they went into the bushes, you know, to hide from the enemies. And my father would go and find them, you know, every now and again when he was safe. So my parents were really very influential, obviously, you know, in my life, and especially my mom. My mom is probably the woman that has influenced me the most. And she has been the inspiration behind a lot of my work, which centers around women. I grew up with very strong women. My granddad had 3 wives, you know, because he's allowed to. In my culture, you can have as many wives as you want, because women are considered assets. You know, they're sources of wealth for the family, and we continuously people try to grow the family, because the bigger the family is, the more powerful you are. You know, you can occupy a whole village, which is sort of how my village is set out in a way. We are made up of big families. The families grew so big that we became a village. So, and because of that, we are like thousands, you know, from the same family, and you can't intermarry because though you might not know each other, but you are from the same roots. So we have an entire village is made up of one family, and you can't marry. So my parents met the role of women is really quite important in my culture. Women are very princessy, you know, they're very well regarded, very protected, and you know, and because of that, it makes every woman in my culture really very confident because they know their value in society. And often it is really very tough for men to get married because the price of a woman is so high, you know. So men, especially now, young men find it really difficult to get married because they cannot fulfill all the financial obligations of acquiring a life. So if you go on social media and talk about marrying an Igbo woman, you will see all the men complaining that they are not able to marry because so the value of a woman is really very high, and that has informed my view of women, you know, as this beings who are incredibly powerful. And when a man marries a woman, that is when you start being respected in society. You know, if you're not married, he's not married, you know. But when you then acquire a wife, they know what you would have gone through to be able to acquire a wife. So that made you really quite strong. So like I said, my mom inspired a lot of my work, and it's funny. She was very different from her time. She never wanted to get married at all, which everybody thought she was crazy. You know, how can you not get married? But when my dad, you know, set eyes on her, you know, she was a student in his he was teaching in the teacher's training, so she was a student there, and my dad fell in love, you know, with her. When I say student, not young students, they were, you know, teachers training, so they were adults. and he left his fiancée who he had and decided this is the woman for me. So obviously my mom wasn't having any of it. So my dad told his family, as you do, if you want to get married, and you know, say, that woman, get me that's the one I want. So my dad told his family that he wanted to marry this woman, and his family went to negotiate with my mom's family, you know, independent of my mom. She wasn't aware of any of this. So one funny thing happened. My mom was coming home from school one weekend to go and visit her family, and there were lots of signs of festivities happening in her village. You know, women all dressed up, you know, carrying baskets of food, all singing joyously, heading towards where her own house was. So she said, "Excuse me, what's happening in our village today?" And they said, "Oh, it's your wedding day. We're going for your wedding." Yeah. So she was married off, you know, to my dad. So she ran away during the wedding, and they brought her back, and then the marriage took place. But she ended up having a really, really happy marriage. She didn't want to be married, but once she was married, she said, "Okay, if I'm going to be married, I'm going to make the best marriage possible, and I'm going to make sure that my life is successful." So they had a really very happy marriage, and she ended up becoming the leader in our village, you know, the women's group, and she supported my dad to become a lawyer, you know, really become the first lawyer in our village, which then sparked a wave of young people who wanted to be lawyers, both young men and young women. So because of her story, I've always believed in how strong a woman is. A woman, you know, women are custodians of society. And then I did my education, firstly in Nigeria, then got bored, you know, moved to France, as you do. I wanted to come to England, but England was so expensive. The education was so expensive, and the French were offering cheaper rates. So I went to France, I went to Paris, furthered my education there, and it was while I was there that I discovered art. You know, Paris, you know, France is known for art, music, love, romance, and all that. Because I wasn't really very exposed to art as we know it when I was growing up. Though I did some art and craft, but in Paris, I was really exposed to European art, and went to the opera, went to ballet, and all of that. I used to look after kids for rich French people, so I could afford to go to all those places. So I suppose that is where my love of art started. Worked in France for a while, then met an Englishman, you know, who was living out there, and who then brought me to England. Did a series of things in England, worked in the bank, you know, Lloyd's, and worked, you know, in investments. But something was always missing, you know, something was always missing. So I think around 2007 or so, I was in a job that I didn't like, in recruitment in the Hastings area. The company was going through changes. I was really very sad in that job. And then I would come home and I would paint, you know, buy canvas. And I started dabbling. I started painting flowers, you know, tiger lilies, because they're big architectural flowers. I started painting that as a way to keep sane and to relieve, you know, the frustrations and all the people who annoy me at work that I really want to, you know, give it to. So instead I took that out on the canvas itself, and that's how I started painting. I've never gone to art school, you know, so everything I know about painting I taught myself. But I put the painting, I did a series of work, sold a few. I think probably sold around £80 at that time, because I didn't really know much about art value and all that. Then put that on the back burner, life went on, and had a child and all of that. And then in several years, you know, passed. And in 2018, I moved to Doncaster. In 2017, I think, and I watched a Netflix series called Magnificent Century. And in this series, it was the story Ottoman Empire, the empire that controlled, most of the world in the 1500s. So it was a story of Suleiman the Magnificent, specifically the story of Hurrem Sultan, who was a young 17-year-old slave girl that was stolen from her little village in present-day Ukraine, and when her village was attacked. So she was stolen from there. And they first of all they transported her to the Crimea, and then from there they ended up giving her as a present to Suleiman, who was the Sultan of the Ottoman Empire at the time. So she entered into his harem, where you have a vast number of women who are there just for the pleasure of the king. And so the story was very inspiring because she rose from a young slave girl to become the queen of the Ottoman Empire. So you can imagine what she must have, the battle she must have fought to make a place for herself, to defeat all the other women in the harem, and to become the queen. She famously had huge number of face-off with the woman who was the queen when she arrived as a slave. They saw the queen there was Mahidevran. She battled, she did everything possible. And she said, if I have to be in this harem, it's gonna have to be on my terms. I didn't choose to be here. I was brought here. If the Sultan touches me, he cannot touch any other woman. It has to be me or not. And she did everything. She killed who she had to kill, poisoned, until she rose all the way to become the queen, and then installed her son. Her son, Mehmet, I think, became the prince, and then carried on her lineage. So I was really, really very touched by the story of this young girl. And I said, I'm going to find other women who battled against all odds to make a place for themselves in their society. And that story resonated with me also because of the story of my mom and how she was married off against her will, and she made a place for herself in the society, and she inspired all the women in my village to become someone. So there was a similarity between the two stories. And then as a result of that, I started looking around. There will be other women who have lived similar experiences. I mean, the subject of women is very, very topical. And the more I research women, the more I realize that the whole world revolves around women. In many cultures, their cultures revolve around what women can do, what they cannot do, what they should wear, and what they should not wear. How much they should be paid and how much they should not be paid. Wars have been fought because of women. Like powerful men around the world have been toppled because of women. So it began to make sense to me that it wasn't really about women being the weaker sex, but it was about women being so strong that they have to be subdued in any way possible so that they do not, so their strength has to be harnessed because of the strength that they represent. So, and that is the story of how this collection came about. I probably researched about 150 women all through, all through the centuries, and I wanted to put together a collection that represented different parts of the world, to the north, south, east, and west, and also wanted women whose stories sort of resonated with me in a way. Some of them were quite controversial. For example, if you look around the corner, you will see the one of Golda Meir, who really worked hard to make Israel a state. After all the Jews came, back from all over the world around 1945, that's when Israel became a state. So she worked incredibly hard to make that happen, along with some other people in the region. They told her she was a woman that she couldn't do it. You know, she needed a lot of money to raise for that to happen, and they said, no, you're not going to do it. And then she famously went back to the USA where she grew up and rallied all the Jews around, and she managed to raise $50 million, which helped, you know, for Israel to become a state. When I was painting her story, I really needed to find an angle, you know, through which I can portray her story on canvas without, you know, I wanted something that when you look at it, you will understand what's going on. And when I looked at the Israel, you know, when it became a state, it was like a new state was being born. So the birth of Israel became the principal narration for that story, which is why I painted her pregnant. She was carrying Israel in her stomach. And during that time, there were many regions who were against Israel becoming a state. So they were being attacked from the north and from the south, which is why you see the four rifles pointing at the stomach, and the next. So when I did, I put a sketch of that on the internet. Somebody came to see me at my studio, really very annoyed, demanding that I should paint another woman from Palestine to balance, the story. They were very insistent. No, you must paint this woman. So I said, but you can't really tell me what to paint. It's my, I'm not judging anyone. I'm just relating on canvas something that interests me. So don't force me to paint another woman. It's not political. It's just an art collection. I was very afraid, when they came to look for me because I was in a public studio. So that tells you the power, that art can have. It's a bit like writing, sometimes when journalists write, things that people don't agree with, it can spark the war, So as artists, or artists myself who do, historical work, sometimes we come under attack, for things that we do, and also quite a lot of the women, I can relate with them in a way. For example, Dr. Mary Maynard Daly, who has the heart as the centerpiece. If you read her story, she was an American scientist who actually did her initial research of how the heart ages, how the arteries age and all of that, which leads to high blood pressure, high cholesterol and all of that, which now paved the way for what we know, today about the heart and heart attacks. And, we see TV adverts talking about cholesterol and all of that, telling you to, use, I can't remember, that butter, If not for the work she did in that area, we wouldn't know what we know today, and a vast number of people take high blood pressure tablets, including myself. So we have had to thank for that. And also next to her is Stephanie Quillick. She was a woman that I also discovered during this collection. She discovered the fabric and the textile Kevlar, which is used in bulletproofs, and so you can imagine the thousands and thousands of lives she has saved by the discovery of just that one textile. The whole army, the police, all the security forces, and her Kevlar is used in over 200 products around the world, including, aeroplanes, ships, everything you can think of. Just, from that one discovery she made. And not a lot of people know about this one. A lot of people know about bulletproof, but how many of us know about her? And also, I think around the corner there, over there, you have Maria Montessori, who worked a lot on children's education. I mean, we want our children to have the best education possible, but she found out that it was best to let a child lead, how they want to learn, because every child is different and every child learns in different ways. I was very interested in her story because my daughter over here, she struggled as a young child to learn how to read, because they were teaching her the same way they were teaching every other child, and that doesn't suit everyone. But what she said is that the child should be at the center of the learning, not the teacher. It is the child that should be at the center, and the child should learn from their peers as well. So she found that the Montessori schools where she made all the different learning aids for the kids, and each child would naturally gravitate to the object which is of interest to them at that particular time, and then they learn from their older ones. So that is one. A lot of schools have now included all her method in mainstream schools, which is quite interesting. So this is sort of how the collection came about, and the idea is to highlight the important role that women play in our society, and to perhaps look at women differently, not as a weaker sex, but as people with incredible power and incredible talent who need to be supported a bit more and encouraged a bit more. So that is the story of the collection. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, feel free. I'll be here for a few more minutes.
Well, I'm just a comment. I'm so glad we've happened upon you by accident. We've been married 45 years today. Yeah, so our wedding day was a bit like that.
Yeah, it was.
And I was one of the first women priests in the Church of England. So really, this is interesting.
Get your paints out.
Sorry?
Get your paints out.
Yeah.
My next collection, because I think the director of this place, she's also the first female director in over 200 years.
Oh, right.
So it's quite interesting.
It must have been difficult to stop at 20, because I'm sure you could, throughout history, there are, many strong women who've made who've changed lives and societies and so on. But I suppose you had to, make a limit, say, let's do 20 and...
I have to think about various things. I have to think about the exhibition, the spaces where they will be displayed. You see, 20 makes a good collection for a proper exhibition. 10, is small, because it is an educational exhibition. I wanted to cover as many sectors as possible without boring people to I wanted sciences, engineering, so and for me 20 felt like a good number, but if you count, there are actually 21. But I started off with a working title of 20, and it became 21 because of Rosa Parks. Because I finished the collection, and then my daughter started doing Rosa Parks in school, and my husband said, you must include Rosa Parks. I considered her initially, but I felt her story was too well known. Everyone already knows, I can't bring anything different. But in the end, I said, actually, her story is too important not to include. So I decided, to include her. But also in making a selection of the women that I was explaining before, I chose women, whose lives were already complete, so they have lived their life. That narrowed it down, quite a bit. And I didn't want to go too far back in history, because I had to think of the younger ones as well, what would interest them. It was, some people suggested Boudica.
Boudica.
But I felt it was too long ago, so I sort of limited myself to the 1500s, worked my way down here. Yeah.
How long did it take you to this collection?
It probably took about 2 years
Wow.
to paint, you know, the entire thing. But then maybe a bit longer because by the time you start doing the finishing, the framing and all of that, and you add a few more months. And I did it from scratch because I bought the rolls of canvas, so they came in rolls.
Right.
And I built all the canvases, you know, went to the wood the timber merchants, cut all the wood and built all the French stretch them before I started painting. So
Do you always finish one and that's it and go on to the next one?
yes,
Oh, do you?
yes,
Yeah.
I feel it. I don't paint because when you're painting one, you're really very into the person.
Yes.
You know, if they're in the USA in Oregon, for example, I am there in USA in Oregon in my head, and my studio is in my basement. So once I go to the basement, whoever I'm painting, the basement becomes that place. DC becomes Oregon, you know. So you're like you're alone between you, the woman, and the canvas. So you're like really very much inside her story as well, not just the brush. You're inside her story. It's really very interesting because each woman sort of presented to me how she wanted to be depicted. It was quite weird. That was what I felt when I was painting, because I would start off reading the story of the woman and make a few notes. This is how I'm going to depict her. When I start painting, it's completely different. From you know, I would decide, okay, the hand will be like this. By the time I finish, the hand will be like something like it. And I do not know how that happens. For example, this one here, Ada Lovelace, the computer program, I had a clear idea of what she was going to look like. She was going to be, you know, something like that, looking back at you. That was what I was painting, you know. But when I finished the initial sketch, she was looking in front. I was freaked out because I painted, you know. So I said, okay, I'm going to leave it like this. This is how she wants to present herself. And the same thing goes with Getty Curry over there, the woman who did the study of carbohydrate metabolism. You know, her hands were, she was going to be in a pharmacy, you know, like room, you know, like the old style pharmacies with all those, but she was going to be sitting in the middle there on the table with a few things in front of her. But by the time I finished, her hands were like this, you know, so it was very freaky. And then I gave up trying to decide how they would be. And the Rosalind Franklin over there is quite an interesting one because her life was really very short. She died at 35, but she did, you know, something that, you know, affects everyone, you know, DNA, discovery of the structure of DNA, because her life wasn't very long and it was centered on that one thing. It was really difficult to find, you know, a composition for her. But also, she did a lot of research on the structure of viruses. You can imagine we have been living with viruses for the past, I don't know how many years now, 3-4 years. If not for the work she did at that time to discover how, you know, the structure of viruses, we wouldn't be able to discover, you know, how to control coronavirus and all the other viruses we've had, you know, since that time. So they're pretty
How long did it take to create your hair?
My hair, it takes half a day.
Wow, that's
Takes half a day.
it was a week.
You take it because it took half a day because it's that bigger ones. If you do smaller ones, you're there at the salon for an entire day.
Yeah.
But we're used to we do that from the time, you know, you're born already. So, and I also try to match my hair with the collection.
Thank
you very much. Yeah.
Suits your personality.
Thank you.
Yeah.
It's very convenient. It means I don't have to comb my hair in the morning, so just get up and go. Anyway, if you have no more
Thank you
questions,
very much.
thank Thank you so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you. Enjoy the rest of the evening.